The American Association of Clinical Endocrinology president Dr. Scott Isaac said that his organization does not support the routine use of microdosing GLP medications in clinical care and recommend adherence to FDA-approved dosing guidelines for these agents. Current scientific evidence for microdosing the medication is limited, with most reports being anecdotal. The long story short, there are people who have been trying and advocating microdosing drugs like Ozempic. First of all, Fredo, can you explain what Ozempic actually is and does?
Yeah, so there's really 3 drugs that you need to understand to fully understand the story and why that statement is so, like, basically what Merrick just read is a statement that says, I mean, this will even seem inherently absurd off the bat. Taking 12 to 15 milligrams of something is completely safe, but trying to take 1 milligram or half a milligram of it, that's dangerous and you shouldn't do it, right? Like, that's obviously like a preposterous statement. And I have some theories on that, but first I want to get to sort of Merrick's question here. So when we're talking about like GLP-1 class of drugs broadly, there's really 3 that you need to think about. There's semaglutide, which is marketed as Ozempic and Wegovy. And a lot of people, when they say Ozempic, they mean the whole class, because that was the first one to really blow up. That drug's actually already outdated. If you're like people that are going to the doctor today and that get on something from one of these class of drugs, they are probably not going to be prescribed Ozempic, because there's a better one that I'm going to speak to in a minute out already. And that's probably going to pass, semaglutide, Ozempic in market share within the next year or 2. The only reason like the cutoff is not immediate is because typically they don't switch someone over if they're on Ozempic and they've had success with it, because there's you have to like titrate down off Ozempic and then up on to the next thing. So they typically don't bother. But like new people that are getting on now are typically taking tirzepatide, which is like marketed as Zepbound. And that is sort of the next generation. And the difference between the 2, well, first of all, in terms of efficacy, tirzepatide is both more effective and has less side effects. It's like the rare double combination. And the reason is because Ozempic is solely what's called a GLP-1 agonist. And what that means is all of your cells have little receptors on them, right? For all different hormones. And that basically what that means is when your body releases a hormone, that hormone will kind of swim right by certain cells, but other cells sort of have a receptor that's looking for it, and it'll slide right in and create changes. It's sort of like a key going into a lock. The receptor is like a lock and the hormone's like a key. Well, Ozempic is basically a synthetic hormone, is the best way to think of it, that only stimulates the GLP-1 receptors. And that does what the GLP-1 receptors do is, in the very short story, is they improve your insulin sensitivity. They increase your satiety, meaning you feel satisfied and full faster, which once we get through this, I want to talk about that a little bit too. There's some very interesting knock-on effects of that. But those receptors also contribute to the third thing, where most of the side effects come in. They delay gastric emptying, which on some level is a good thing. It helps it helps even more towards the fullness and satiety. The downside to it is it causes some people to get GI distress. So they can get constipation, they can get heartburn, gas. Like that's where a lot of those problems come in from that effect. Typically, yes, go right ahead.
One thing that gives me great pleasure. There's one Matthew Iglesias article that I really love. You don't hear me say that often. Matthew Iglesias got the gastric bypass surgery like a month before the miracle diet drugs came out. Fuck you, Matt. And it's
for once, he was on the take farm a little too late.
And his whole article is like he's bitching and complaining about getting put under, and that doc had to go in through this hole or through that hole and sew his stomach up. And it's like a week later, it's like, oh, why'd you do that? You didn't know that we have a
pill for that.
Did you know we have a miracle diet drug? You don't do any of that shit. Just pop one or two. You'll be fine. He got the gastric bypass like a month before these shit came out. Oh God, the Lord works in mysterious ways. Continue.
So the difference on tirzepatide from, which is again marketed as Zepbound, from like Ozempic, is that it stimulates two different receptors, is the way to think about it. It stimulates the GLP-1 receptors that Ozempic does, but it also stimulates GIP receptors. The very high level version of that is like when that receptor is stimulated, it also improves insulin sensitivity and also increases your satiety and fullness, just like the GLP-1, but it doesn't have the gastric emptying effects. So typically, because you're stimulating two receptors instead of one, you're operating at a lower dose of the actual GLP-1 part of the drug, which means you're having lower side effects, but also increased efficacy because you're stimulating two different types of receptors that work synergistically together. There's also one drug that's one level even past tirzepatide. It's not FDA approved yet, though, so normies are not using it, but it's popular in the bodybuilding community, called retatrutide, and that's in phase 3 trials right now. That will blow tirzepatide out of the water once it eventually gets approved, because each one of these things are massively more effective and have lower side effects than the one that came before it. So yeah, as Cluston says, retatrutide's big on TikTok because you can get it for, well, I got to say, so we don't get kicked off the air, do not take any of this without your doctor. Do not buy from research chemical sites. But the way that this works on TikTok, and also the way bodybuilders get it, is there are research chemical companies that will sell it to you, and they just have to slap a label on it that says not for human consumption, for research purposes only. Which is that's been a big thing in peptide. The peptide industry works that way too, because those are not FDA approved.
15% off with your coupon code Bog Beef.
Bog Beef, you are making a joke, but that is how that, like retatrutide and all those research chem companies, that's how they work. There's generally influencers on like TikTok and stuff will give out like coupon codes for it. So yeah, like retatrutide stimulates 3 different receptors. So the first 2 that I just spoke about, and also the glucagon receptor. And it without getting into it, it stimulates the glucagon receptor in a very specific way that, again, amplifies all the same effects, because now you're hitting it at 3 different angles, allows you to have a lower dosage, so you have less of the gastric emptying delay, which can cause issues. So what's interesting right now
to follow is the results of the drug are less appetite and your pipes running slower.
Yes, that's one, but also, and equally as important, if not more so, this is an important point, is sort of the increased insulin sensitivity piece. So if your insulin sensitivity is off, right, and there's a lot of theories on why this is, even if you're eating a relatively healthy diet, you may still be overweight. You're not going to be 400 pounds or something unless you have like a serious problem. But you could be overweight from, you might be 10 pounds overweight or in a bad case, 15 pounds overweight. No one really knows why these imbalances are so much more common now than they were 20 years ago, because this is kind of like my hot take on this. Yeah, there are a lot of like lazy people that are eating bad. And part of it is actually very much the decline in smoking. People overeat now more than they used to because of they're not smoking. And there's a a direct correlation there. But that doesn't explain all of it. There is something either in the food, in the air, microplastics, seed oils. It could be a combination of all these things. We just don't know for sure that is causing like a disruption with this stuff and is causing people to be fatter than they would be having eaten the same, amount of calories, let's say, 25 or 30 years ago. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And if you're listening to this, and I know this subject gets a lot of people very passionate, and Fredo won't say this, but I'll say this: if you want to debate him about this, anybody's listening, you have to be equally as yoked as Fredo is to get in on that. So if you're like a bodybuilder or whatever, then you can step into the arena. But I don't want to hear it from somebody who's skinny fat or whatever.
Yeah, I remember. I did steroids when I was in my early 20s. And this big guy at the gym, he gave me this book. Is that Mike Mincer wrote the big steroid book?
I know what you're talking about. I think it was him, but I could be misremembering.
And it had all this stuff. You cycle, you want some androgen, you don't want just you all that stuff. But in the back of the book, they had the random stuff. And they brought up the that super fat burner that like actual bodybuilders would take to not fat burn, but drain them of water. Talk about how dangerous that was, blah, blah, blah. Forget all that shit. But I remember it said that they had bodybuilder stuff with insulin. I was like, my best friend is like born diabetic. He's skinny as a rail, but he shoots the insulin. I was like, bodybuilders using insulin. What would they use that for?
It's insanely dangerous because you can actually die, and there are professional bodybuilders that have died from it. It's because they're eating so much, they want to be able to pack all that glucose into their muscles to the maximum extent possible. So even though they are not diabetic, they are shooting insulin to allow them to just store more and more muscle glycogen. The problem with that is if you misdose the insulin or you don't eat enough when you're taking it, you will go into a coma and die. And that has happened even in the last 10 years to a couple of professional bodybuilders. You'll actually, your blood sugar will actually drop too low. One guy, the name's escaping me right now, he actually passed out and choked on the food he was eating because he didn't eat quickly enough after shooting his insulin. It was a very bad story.
That seems like an insanely dangerous thing to do for. I'm guessing the gains aren't that crazy, are they? Compared to what
they are if you're taking huge amounts of steroids, which they
gotcha. Gotcha.
Yeah.
I gotcha.
Yeah, I remember it was in the back of the book with it did not tell you what to do with it or whatever, etc. By the way, hot and dry, sugar's high. Cold and clammy, you need some candy. There you go.
There you go. But anyway, so what originally the bodybuilding community figured out, and the bodybuilding, what happens is like the tech nerd biohackers always basically just steal stuff from that bodybuilders have figured out, is that not so much Ozempic, which is semaglutide, but more so originally tirzepatide and now retatrutide, which is even more effective. Even if you are not like a morbidly obese person, by dosing it differently, you can get a huge benefit. You need a much lower dose than a morbidly obese person gets, and you'll get all kinds of benefits. Insulin sensitivity. If you're one of these people that has trouble losing that last 5 or 10 pounds, but are otherwise healthy, that weight just kind of slides right off.
Okay.
In fact, very quickly, because it corrects some of those insulin sensitivity and other hormonal issues that we don't know why people have them today that they didn't have 25 years ago. So this has now entered into like quasi common knowledge. And that's where one of the listeners even mentions, TikTok. And it's playing out in like, and there's one important thing to too, before I get into that too, is the way this stuff is dosed. So the actual dose that's recommended by the manufacturer is moronic because they didn't do the dosing. They did the dosing, and I get why they did it. Assuming that like everyone is late, you have to inject these drugs, by the way. You can't, it's like not a pill that you can take. So they assumed that people were too lazy to inject themselves every day or even every other day. So the drugs have a 6-day half-life, and what the way they have people, if you're following medical advice that you're supposed to dose them, is you take a really big dose on Monday, and then you don't take another dose until the following Monday. So if you know anything about half-life, what that means is you got a ton of this crap in your bloodstream at the beginning of the week, and then you have much less at the end of the week, right? Than you had at the beginning of the week. Typically, that's not optimal, and also theoretically should also exacerbate the side effect profile, right? Because for those first day or two of the week, you've got a much larger dose floating around in your system than you really need to. And the only reason you're doing that is to make sure you've still got some in your system by the end of the week.
By Sunday, you'd be shitting your brains out.
Are doctors doing that, or is this just the people?
No, that is the doctor way to do it. Like if you go to get, that's what's so crazy about this. If you were to go get it from a doctor, they're going to give you the manufacturer's instructions, which are to dose it once a week with a big dose. You titrate up to get to that big dose, but to dose it once a week. And that dose, that did not come from science. It came from, well, we think this is the most likely way that lazy people will actually do it. Right.
So the half-life is only like 3 or 4 days or something?
6. Yeah. The half-life is 6 days on most of these drugs.
It would need to be like 10 or 12 to do weekly, right?
Well, you could do weekly at any half-life that's approaching 6 to 7 days or greater. The problem is what that still means is you don't have a consistent amount in your blood, right? Like you follow what I'm saying? Like it's constantly declining throughout the week, which is again, that's going to exacerbate. I'm not saying it's the worst thing in the world. Obviously it tested well enough in the trials. It probably works for a good amount of people. So the bodybuilding community and later like the biohacker nerds like figured out 2 things. One, like, well, we don't care about injecting ourselves, so we'll just take much smaller doses like every other day, right? And number 2, even if you're aggregating the amount we take in a week, we're just going to take a much smaller dose because we're not obese, and let's see if that has still some effects. And let me give you like real examples. So like retatrutide, which is actually what most people are using, they're doing it this way. Again, I can't advise that you do that. It's not FDA approved. Talk to your doctor. But I will to do a direct comparison, we have to say tirzepatide, right? So tirzepatide, because that's FDA approved. Tirzepatide, like a fairly common dose that you eventually titrate you're up to, is you might be taking 12 milligrams once a week. If you're just trying to do it for optimal health and the reasons I just said, and you're not morbidly obese, you might be taking 500 micrograms 3 times a week, right? Like that. So like if you add that up, that's 1.5 milligrams over the week instead of 12. I mean, think about how colossally, different that is. And people are getting massive positive effects from this. It's very real. So 2 things have happened because of this. So number 1, retatrutide is promoted on TikTok. It's very easy to get. It's not illegal. It's illegal to sell for human consumption, but it's not illegal to purchase. Again, not recommending that you do it unless you're doing it for research. But that has gotten very popular. Plenty of TikTok influencers and just it's YouTube, all kinds of things will tell you exactly how to take it and where to get it. A lot of it's third-party tested for purity, how to reconstitute it, et cetera. And people compare notes on microdosing schedules. The other thing that's going on, and the thing that statement that news story that you just referenced, that release from the American Academy of Endocrinologists is getting at, is there's two big telehealth companies have popped up now that specialize in prescribing off-label microdosing of tirzepatide to people who are not obese. Which is interesting in that it is being prescribed specifically for cosmetic purposes. For this reason, this microdosing schedule. Whatever you may think of that, what's completely ridiculous about it is that release that from the American Academy of Endocrinologists that you mentioned, Merrick. What they're basically saying is, yeah, taking some colossal dose every week is totally safe, but taking some tiny dose of 1/10 the amount, you shouldn't do that because that could be dangerous. I mean, think about how odd, what an odd thing, how odd the medical community has gotten on this issue. I'm not sure why they're doing that. So why they're so keyed up about it. Right. So, and what I mean by that is, in theory, they're not seeing, if people are taking tiny doses like this, these are not people that you're seeing go in the emergency room or that's not really happening. The normal conspiracy is that pharma would be telling them, to crack down on this. That doesn't make sense to me either, though, because as long as if they're getting it from one of the telehealth services, they're getting the prescription drug. And these are people that otherwise would not be prescribed it because they're not sufficiently obese to fit the normal patient profile. The only thing I can think of, and I don't know this is the case, is that they're actually, that the pharma companies could actually be afraid that the microdosing will get popular enough that less people will be taking the, quote unquote clinical dose, giant dose, and they'll actually be selling less of it, on balance, if that makes sense. That's the only explanation I've been able to come up with for this. And one last point I kind of want to make before I get your guys, hot takes on this is that there is another effect that has not been studied yet, of both tirzepatide and retatrutide. This is all anecdotal, but part of the way these drugs work is they affect your satiety and impulse control, not only with respect to food, but more broadly. So there are a lot of reports of alcoholics in recovery, say, right, that go on these drugs and then they say, oh, you know what? I'm not saying they're cured of alcoholism. Let me be clear, but they're I've read accounts where people are I'm not as drawn to alcohol as I normally was before I started taking these drugs. Or, Cluston says even nicotine. Some people that are addicted to smoking have had the same result by this, which is really interesting. And we might learn something really interesting about the way the brain, processes hedonic impulses or whatever from studying this. And the most interesting of which I've only seen a few of these, but anecdotal reports that trans people that take this stuff then realize that they're no longer transgender. Oh, I really am a man. I was born in the correct body.
That was what I was going to ask, because that right now the model we have of addiction is something wrong with dopamine. However, they also throw in things that they'll be oh yeah, there's also serotonin, GABA, blah blah blah. It doesn't sound like they actually have figured it out. And so does GLP-1, as far as we know, does it directly interface with dopamine at all?
Well, here's the difference. So, if you're taking say a psychiatric drug, that is a drug that is directly neurochemically hitting your brain. And this goes to something we were talking about before the show with the way other peptides, research peptides work. That is not the way these other drugs work. Let's use retatrutide, which stimulates 3 different things. It's not directly affecting the neurochemistry of your brain. What it is doing is it is hitting receptors in your brain that is making your brain tissue produce and process its own neurochemicals differently. Does that make sense? So it's what these drugs are doing is they are working with your natural body rhythm and chemistry instead of trying to chemically disrupt it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, okay. You're taking it and harnessing it rather than overriding it.
Exactly. And that doesn't mean that like all doses of it are safe. It doesn't mean any of that. It just means that it's a step removed from trying to directly chemically affect something. You're basically, instead of just hitting your brain or your body with a chemical, you're hitting it with a signal to produce its own chemical reactions. And to your point, Bog Beef, because brain chemistry is so complex, we actually don't understand all of the way that the neurochemical impulses work in the brain that affect satiety. But what we do know is that at a minimum, these 3 receptors that retatrutide hits, they all do affect satiety. And they create a cascade of probably neurochemical responses that we haven't even discovered yet, perhaps, that control those impulses. Does that make sense?
Yeah. My favorite addiction for modeling this stuff is sex addiction, because I think it's easy to understand. If a normal person has an encounter, they're like, oh wow, that was great. Now they're lethargic and they want to go to sleep or whatever, right? But there's some people, they have sex and they don't have there's no fulfillment. They don't they do it and they're like, okay, well, when's the good part happen? So then they keep doing it nonstop, and then there's never the reward function. Your brain's never like, okay, buddy, you won the championship. Here's your dopamine. Take a nap. That never happens. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, 100%.
Okay.
And that's why, like, my hot take on like these drugs is that I actually think the microdosing is kind of promising. I think the way there, there is an issue where like obese people are taking these drugs, not making and they're not microdosing them. They're taking the normal clinical dose, right? They're not making lifestyle changes, and they're just eating. They're eating terrible food and not taking care of themselves, but they're just eating less of it, which is not good, but it is objectively better, right? They're still malnourished. They're still going to have all kinds of health issues, but at least they are going to have less health issues, right? Because the obesity is taken out of the mix. It may prevent them from getting type 2 diabetes. So optimally, people that are morbidly obese would not do an either or. They would do this in concert with a healthier lifestyle, and then eventually switch to like more of a microdosing schedule, right? Like that would seem to be ideal.
People
But
like raw egg nationalists have been very skeptical of this stuff, or emphasizing the side effects. But I mean, we've never seen an impact like this. I mean, maybe there was. You look around and you're like, oh, this fat celebrity is all of a sudden they're skinny. Like every rich fat person that everyone knew, now all of a sudden is skinny. This stuff obviously obviously works to some level.
It does. It absolutely does. And the side effects are real. They can be reduced if you're able to get yourself in a healthy enough spot where you can get by just on microdosing. Like those side effects are going to be much less. And one of our subvisuals says there's all these other knock-on effects in and around addiction, which can be positive, and Parkinson's even. There's some early evidence there. It's too early to know for sure that these drugs even help with that kind of thing. So I'm not a hater on these. I'm more of like, I think the normal way that they are used can be is probably not their best use. But like I'm hopeful that that over time, microdosing will become more acceptable. And again, I gotta say it so we don't get like kicked off the air or something. But don't do any of this stuff without talking to a doctor. I'm just some guy on the internet. Don't trust what I'm telling you.
Well, to quote
Well,
Dr. Drew, there are no free rides in nature. Go ahead.
Say that again.
To quote Dr. Drew, there are no free rides in nature.
Thank you. Yes, that's a great point. I just had a little devil's advocate thing. Is it possible that the weekly dose is suboptimal, but the idea is you have to inject it? Because I assume if something like this would destroy your kidneys if they took it in pill form, so like it's injected, right?
That's not why. It's just it wouldn't destroy your kidneys at all if you took a pill. It would just your stomach acid would break it down into its components. It would be ineffective.
Okay. So because it's injected, maybe like it's better for only once a week for people to do it for the average person. Is that possible?
Well, that's what it is. It's like, that's what I mean by laziness, that people find it too inconvenient to inject like more than once a week, doing it more of like a 2 to 3 day week schedule. That is actually the reason why that is the recommendation, that they call that, I think, adherence in a trial. People will adhere to the protocol better because some people don't like injecting themselves. But yeah, that's kind of that's the idea behind this stuff. Bobby, if you said something very interesting, there's no free rides in nature, and that's true. I'll take the other side of that one, and I don't want to seem like the pharma pusher here because usually I'm very skeptical of them. But I can tell you what the free ride is on this. In nature, if these pathways were being stimulated, you would die, right? Because you wouldn't eat enough during periods of abundance, because you would have your satiety would be too high. And therefore, when the winter came or a bad crop season or whatever, you were going to be the first guy to die because you weren't putting on that extra body fat during the good times.
Mm-hmm. This is almost like a almost like a miniature. What do you call it when a bear goes to sleep for a month?
Hibernation.
Yeah. That kind of thing. I saw this brought up. I wonder what you think about this. Subvisual Hayes says the philosophical problem is that injected pharma willpower will discourage people from developing actual willpower life change. Now, I heard this. So when I first read the thing about its effect on addiction, the phrase was in there, liquid willpower. Now, there would obviously be a liquid willpower from just, hey, if this just affects your satiety and stuff like that. Is there any form of like a generalized willpower, like, oh, this person started taking this weight loss drug, and now they're I studied the night before for my test and stuff like that. Sounds like crazy shill mode level. I mean, like that could be possible. However, I'm not going to rule it out. I mean, is that possible?
Well, yeah. First of all, I just want to say I agree with Subvisual Haze that like there is a philosophical problem here, and that there is and that's kind of what I mean. Like there is a subgroup of people that won't make any lifestyle changes. They're just going to eat a smaller volume of bad food and still live an unhealthy lifestyle, and that is bad. Right. Like I agree with that. And that's just human nature. And I don't have a solution to that problem. Cause I mean, regardless of what anyone thinks about these drugs, they're certainly here to stay. To your point though, Bog Beef, it appears, it's very early, but it appears that there is in fact a sort of generalizable willpower. Yes. That in some way is probably, neurochemical or, part of your brain function. Yes. And this kind of makes sense if you just think about it. When people are really stressed or tired, they have less impulse control kind of across the board, right? Like they won't control what they say. They may say something mean to their wife or husband. They also will eat comfort food, right? Like, cause that's like a lack of impulse control. So like we do see examples of this. It's too early to say for sure, but it certainly seems like that could be the case.
don't take medical advice from us. We're not doctors. But it was interesting. I this came up because I asked Fredo. I keep seeing people talking about peptides, and I had really no idea what the hell they were talking about. And now I do feel like I at least understand what's going on.
Yeah, and that, I mean, this is only one corner of like the sort of broader peptide verse. There's stuff that is available from research chemical companies, which again I'll say so we don't get kicked off. You should obviously not take. That actually honestly has like zero to side effects. Like the worst case scenario is that it just doesn't work. Some people are non-responders. But that's a broad area. I mean, there's stuff that just helps with healing. There's stuff that helps natural testosterone support. Like pretty much there's stuff that helps lengthen telomeres. There's stuff that, has been going on forever. And this stuff is not new. Setting aside like the GLP-1 class drugs and just speaking more to like peptides generally, like a lot of the effective stuff has been commonly used now since the 90s. So like we're on like 30, 35 years of it being used. It generally never gets commercialized because of a lot of it isn't patentable, because it's too close to natural structures. So it can't be patented. Therefore, the drug companies aren't interested in it. But a lot of it is used in Russian gerontology and has been for like, 30, 35 years. So there are studies on it, even long-term ones. And then also just the experience that people in Eastern Europe have been taking this stuff for 20, 30 years, and there haven't seemed to be really any issues with it. Obviously, I'm speaking extremely broadly here, so it depends on what you're using.